At 06:35 local time, an Israeli F-35I Adir was 2 minutes into a strike run over Tehran when its electro-optical targeting system flagged the contact the pilot wasn't expecting. Low altitude, moving fast. There was no denying it. Iranian aircraft were airborne and heading straight towards an aircraft Israel absolutely could not lose right now. The EOTS, short for Electro-Optical Targeting System, is the F-35's built-in targeting camera mounted under the nose you see here, swung toward the contact. Infrared first, 2 hotspots traced for a twin-engine platform, then electro-optical, sharpening the image until the frame snapped into focus. Single tail, swept wing, side by side, 2-seat canopy. This was a Yakovlev Yak-130, NATO reporting. Name Mitten. The Yak-130 was built to teach Russian pilots how to fly real combat jets. Think of it as the learner's permit version of an Su-30, except Iran had bolted R-73E infrared homing missiles to the pylons and wired the aircraft's helmet-mounted sighting system for high off-site targeting. The R-73 can lock a target up to 45 Funigrin off the missile centerline. The pilot doesn't need to point his nose at you, he just needs to look in your general area. Against an F-35, your name ends up on a t-shirt. Against an Israeli Hermes 900 reconnaissance drone with no idea it's being hunted, more than lethal. Miles ahead of the Yak-130, a $10 million Hermes 900 was doing what it had done every day of this war. Orbiting at medium altitude, sensors pointed at the ground, feeding real-time targeting coordinates to every strike aircraft in the wave. The Hermes 900 is Israel's eyes. A 36FT drone built by Elbit that loiters for 30 hours, feeding real-time coordinates to every strike aircraft in the way through satellite data link. Without it, $500 million in precision munitions becomes expensive gravel on the wrong coordinates. The problem, it tops out at 120 knots, can't run, can't fight back. Every F-15 waiting for aim points, every bomb in the queue dependent on the slowest asset in the sky. On the EOTS display, the Yak-130's exhaust plumes push steadily toward the Hermes orbit. At current heading and speed, the Iranian fighter would reach R-73 range in under 5 minutes. Inside the Yak-130's rear cockpit, the weapons officer watched the Hermes drift across his O-scope like a slow-moving target in an arcade game. Fat, radar return at 12,000 tiles eft, holding its orbit with the patience of something that doesn't know it's about to get deleted. He called range to the pilot, 30 kilometers and closing. The pilot eased the nose down, setting up the classic drone intercept profile they'd rehearsed 100 times at Mehrabad. Below the Hermes, angled up. R-73 Seeker looking straight at the drone's engine exhaust. One look, one squeeze. Back in the Adir, 3 clocks started running simultaneously and none of them were on his side. 5 minutes before the Yak-130 reaches R-73 range on the Hermes. Close enough for the Iranian weapons officer to squeeze the trigger and erase Israel's eyes over Tehran. 14 minutes of fuel before the tanks run dry and he's forced to break west for the tanker track over Iraq. Whether the Hermes is alive or not, 9 minutes left in his assigned strike corridor before the next wave of Israeli jets comes screaming through the exact same airspace he's about to abandon. 3 countdowns, ticking at different speeds, all of them converging on the same ugly conclusion. He was running out of time in 3 different ways at once. The ground targets on his original strike list would have to wait. The Hermes couldn't. But the Yak-130 wasn't what worried him. A subsonic trainer versus the most advanced fighter on the planet isn't exactly a prize fight that sells tickets. Everything around the Yak-130 worried him. Intelligence briefings said the Iranians flew Yak-130s alongside MiG-29 Fulcrums, proper air superiority fighters carrying R-27 medium-range missiles, and the same R-73s mated to a platform fast enough to use them. The Yaks were plush targets. The Fulcrums hit whatever came to stop them. This Yak appeared to be alone, but it wasn't. A MiG-29 running dark, radar off, IRST on, maintaining strict emissions control would be invisible to the ASQ-239. Infrared search and track doesn't emit. It receives. The Israeli F-35 pilot took his chances. He dropped toward the city, 25,000 dirhams to 22,000 dirhams FNT. The altimeter unwound and Tehran filled the lower half of his helmet visor, dark neighborhoods stitched between burning wreckage. Smoke columns leaning east in the upper winds. The whole sprawl glowing faintly in infrared like a half-lit campfire. He was leaving his corridor. Descending into airspace, the CAOC hadn't, cleared to protect a drone that didn't know it needed protecting. Miles north inside the lead MiG-29, the Fulcrum pilot had been hunting for 40 minutes and finding nothing. Radar off, radio silent. The IRST sensor swept cold sky in steady arcs, looking for the thermal bloom of an engine against pre-dawn darkness. The only way to find a stealth aircraft without giving yourself away. Think of it like hunting in a pitch-black forest with night, vision goggles. You can see anyone carrying a torch. But the moment you turn on your own flashlight, every hunter in the woods knows exactly where you are. 5 days of war had taught the surviving Iranian pilots one rule: emit your radar, and that's the last mistake you'll ever make. So he flew dark, patient, the IRST cycling through its scan pattern like a sniper waiting for movement. His wingman held formation a mile to the east, running the same profile. Somewhere above them, Israeli jets were tearing the Iranian military apart. The Fulcrum pilot couldn't see them, couldn't find them. But if one of them did something aggressive, descended with hot engines, opened a weapons bay, broke from the pattern that had kept them invisible, the IRST would catch the bloom. And at that point, the geometry would finally work in his favor. Back in the Adir, he was now descending through 18,000 DFT. The pilot was in other people's lanes now, and nobody knew he was coming. The sky over Tehran was currently the most dangerous cubic mile of airspace on Earth. Friendly F-35s from 3 different squadrons running strike missions in adjacent corridors. Aircraft that couldn't see each other on radar because that was the entire point of their design. F-15I RAMs working parallel tracks at higher altitude. Hermes drones orbiting below, all of it deconflicted by the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center. Basically air traffic control for a war zone through altitude blocks, timing windows, and geographic corridors that parceled the sky into invisible boxes. Every pilot stayed in his box. The system worked perfectly right up until someone left their box to chase a Yak-130 through the middle of a strike wave with no coordination and no warning. He was outside of his box. 1,000 FT below, an Israeli F-35 from a different squadron was 30 seconds into his own bomb run on a regime target in northern Tehran. The pilot had the spice guidance cued, aim point locked. Everything textbook when Link 16 updated with a friendly contact screaming through his altitude block from the northwest. No coordination, no call out, just a blue triangle cutting across, his lane at 500 knots where nothing was supposed to exist. He broke left hard enough to grey out his peripheral vision, the spice guidance going dumb as the jet wrenched off target. By the time he levelled out and keyed the radio to find out who the hell just blew through his corridor, the contact was already below him and still descending. The ground target would have to wait for the next pass. Whoever was in that aircraft was going somewhere in a hurry, and it wasn't anywhere the CAOC had approved. Back in the descending F-35, the pilot saw the blue triangle break left on Link 16 and understood what had just happened. But understanding wasn't the same as stopping. The Yak-130 was 40 seconds closer to the Hermes, and the math only moved in one direction, 15,000 Rs FT. Now, Iranian ADA tracers arced up from the southern districts. Unguided, unaimed, just someone on the ground shooting at engine noise. Not a threat, but a reminder that the city was still swinging, and he didn't want to get caught slipping as he was diving headfirst into it. At this point, 5 days of strikes had wiped out most of the radar-guided SAMs. The remaining air defences were the ones that don't need radar, IR-guided MANPADs on rooftops, mobile short-range launchers the Iranians had been shuffling between buildings while the smoke provided cover. No electronic signature, silent until the motor lights. The distributed aperture system, DAS cameras. Think of it as a 360-degree security camera system bolted to a fighter jet. 6 infrared eyes that let the pilot see through his own aircraft would give him maybe 3 seconds of warning if a MANPAD is launched. Maybe. Every 1,000 feet of descent brought him closer to hostile streets where someone in sandals just needed a rooftop, and the intelligence gaps were measured in city blocks. 1,000 FT. The DAS flashed. Thermal bloom, street level, bearing 210. The pilot's eyes snapped to the alert. Hotspot rising from between 2 buildings in the southern district. Could be a MANPAD shoulder tube spitting a missile at him right now. Could be a fuel fire from Tuesday's strikes finally cooking off as a gas main. Could be a car burning on an overpass. The system couldn't tell the difference. And at this altitude, neither could he. 2 seconds to decide. Brake hard and lose the intercept geometry on the Yak, or hold course and bet his life on a sensor that was giving him a question mark instead of an answer. He held white knuckles on the stick, eyes locked on the DAS alert, every nerve in his body screaming to brake left while his training told him to ride it out. The bloom faded. No smoke trail, no missile. Not this time, and the altimeter kept unwinding. Miles to the east, the lead Fulcrums wingman was losing patience. 40 minutes of dark sky and empty scopes, the IRST swept its arcs and returned nothing. The same nothing it had returned for the last 2,000 sweeps. His thumb hovered over the radar switch. 1 pulse, 1 2-second sweep of the JUC radar, and he'd have a picture of everything within 50 miles. He'd also have a missile riding the beam back to his cockpit before the scope refreshed. His thumb moved back to the throttle. Discipline held, for now at least. Back in the F-35, as he closed in on the Yak, the Israeli pilot selected his weapon. It wasn't the AMRAAM. The AIM-120's radar seeker goes active in the terminal phase. The Yak-130's radar warning receiver would detect the ping in the final seconds. Not sophisticated enough to save the crew, but sophisticated enough to tell them something was shooting. A weapons officer who knows he's about to have an early retirement has nothing to lose. A snap-fired R-73 at the Hermes on the way down would hit the drone before the AMRAAM reached the Yak. The Python 5 solved that problem. Rafael's 5th generation infrared missile, imaging seeker, lock-on after launch, cued by the pilot's helmet display. The pilot looks at the target. The helmet tells the missile where to look. The missile launches cold, acquires autonomously, and steers itself home on infrared alone. No radar emission, no electronic signature, a ghost until impact. The Yak-130's warning system would register exactly nothing until the airframe stopped existing. It was a short-range weapon though. He had to get closer. Inside the Yak-130, the weapons officer called 7 kiloclunts. The pilot's helmet crosshair was settling over the Hermes' projected position. The R-73 seeker was already tracking the drone's engine heat. A solid tone in his headset confirmed what his eyes could see on the scope. A fat, warm, defenseless target drifting through Iranian airspace like it belonged there. 20 seconds and this war would have its first Iranian air-to-air victory. He could feel it. Back in the Adir at 12,000 FT, the geometry he needed was specific and unforgiving. Above and behind the Yak-130, offset to the right, engines pointed away from the Iranian aircraft sensors. Python 5 looking straight down the Yak-130 exhaust. The only intercept angle that solves stealth, missile performance, survivability, and escape simultaneously. But that angle pointed his own exhaust at the sky behind him. His engine plume burned bright against cold darkness for anything with an infrared sensor and a reason to look. Something had a reason. Inside the lead MiG-29, the Fulcrum pilot swept across the southern sky and the scope blew. Thermal contact, bearing at 185. Something descending fast with hot engines and no radar return, which meant stealth, which meant Israeli, which meant exactly what he was looking for. He didn't touch the radar. He didn't key the radio. He didn't even breathe. 40 minutes of darkness. 40 minutes of nothing. And now, for the first time tonight, something warm was falling out of the sky. He brought the nose around, slow and steady, the way a predator turns its head when prey finally breaks cover. The IRST held the track. The contact was still outside R-27 range, too far to shoot. But the bearing wasn't drifting. It was locked. And the thermal signature wasn't just growing. It was blooming brighter with every sweep, like watching a match being struck in a dark room. Whatever was descending through the darkness over Tehran didn't know he was here. His thumb rested on the weapon selector. Not yet, but soon. He pushed the throttles forward. Back in the Adir, the ASQ-239, the F-35's electronic warfare brain, a system that listens to every radar, radio, and data link signal within 100 miles and builds a real-time map of who's looking where, scanned every frequency across the electromagnetic spectrum and heard nothing behind him. No radar sweep, no radio check-in, no IFF interrogation. The silence could mean empty sky. It could mean perfect Iranian emissions discipline. The pilot had no way to distinguish between the two, and the Hermes had no time for him to figure it out. 10,000 tons FT. The Yak-130's twin exhaust signatures burned bright on yachts. Nose pointed at the Hermes orbit, seconds from firing. Python 5 range in 45 seconds. The Yak was inside 20 seconds of hitting the drone. Somewhere behind the Adir, a threat he could not confirm and could not dismiss was either there or it wasn't. Below him, a city that had been at war for 5 days was still shooting at anything it could hear. And he was descending through all of it to save an asset that would never know how close it came. His left hand moved to the weapon select. For the first time in 40 years, an Israeli pilot was about to take an air-to-air shot against a manned aircraft. The last time was 1985, an F-15 Baz downing 2 Syrian MiG-23s over Lebanon. It was time now for history to repeat itself. The weapons bay had to open. For less than 2 seconds, the F-35's radar cross-section would bloom from marble to barn door, and every surviving Iranian sensor sweeping the sector would get a contact, where nothing had existed a second before. That's exactly what the ASQ-239 did. It had been silently tracking the timing of every Iranian radar sweep for the entire mission, counting the gaps between pulses like a safe cracker, listening for the click. The pilot timed the release to the gap between sweeps. The jet knew when. Nobody was looking. He looked at the Yak-130 through his helmet visor. 2 bright engine plumes, nose pitched toward the Hermes, seconds from firing. The helmet-mounted display fed target coordinates to the Python 5. The missile knew where to go before it left the rail. But it had a problem the pilot couldn't solve. For it. Tehran was burning. 5 days of strikes had turned the city into an infrared nightmare. Smouldering command posts, fuel depots belching heat, debris fields radiating residual warmth across the entire urban sprawl. Picking 2 turbofans out of that background is like finding a specific pair of headlights on a highway where everyone drives lifted trucks with their high beams on at night in the rain. The seeker had to be smarter than the noise. A miss, and the Yak-130 crew goes defensive, radios a contact report, and every surviving SAM operator in Tehran learns an Israeli aircraft is at this altitude in this sector at this exact moment. The F-35's invisibility, the single advantage that makes every other advantage possible, evaporates in one transmission, and whatever was lurking behind the Adir would have a bearing to converge on. It was now or never. The weapons bay doors split open. Wind noise flooded the cavity. The airframe shuddered as the clean aerodynamic shape became a brick for exactly as long as the rail needed to release. The Python 5 dropped off the station and cleared the bay. Doors slammed shut. The marble returned. Total exposure, less than 2 seconds. Every radar in Tehran had just been handed a window to spot the most expensive aircraft in the Israeli inventory. Whether anyone was looking, that was the bet. Inside the MiG-29, the IRST return flickered. The thermal contact the Fulcrum pilot had been tracking. Steady bloom, steady bearing for the last 90 seconds, spiked for a single frame, and then collapsed into nothing. The contact was gone, vanished from the scope like it had never existed. The pilot swept the sensor back across the bearing. Cold sky, empty air. He held the scan for 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Whatever had been descending over Tehran with hot engines and no radar return had either left the area or stopped existing as a thermal source. He would never know which. He kept looking regardless. The Python 5's rocket motor ignited and the weapon screamed along the intercept trajectory the helmet Q had programmed, climbing slightly, then arcing down toward the Yak-130's exhaust. The imaging seeker activated. It saw Tehran. It saw the fires. It saw 2 turbofans pushing a 7-ton aircraft through clean air at 500 knots. The seeker stopped searching and started closing. Inside the Yak-130, the weapons officer never saw it. The radar warning receiver stayed silent. The missile approach warning system, overwhelmed by infrared noise rising from a burning city, registered nothing. The R-73 had a solid tone on the Hermes. 5 seconds from firing, the pilot's finger rested on the release. The Python 5 hit the Yak-130 between the engines. The EOTS footage released by the IDF the following day showed the airframe erupt. Infrared bloom whiting out the sensor for a single frame, then burning wreckage trailing smoke through the pre-dawn sky over the Lavazin Mountains. 2 heat signatures separated from the fireball. Ejection seats firing. Both crew members punching out. The aircraft that was 5 seconds from the first Iranian air-to-air victory in this war came apart over northern Tehran, while the drone it was hunting continued its orbit. Sensors pointed at the ground, completely unaware of what just happened. Behind it, then the pilot keyed the radio. Completed. Target down. The target is down, continuing to strike. He didn't circle, didn't watch the wreckage fall. The Adir rolled back onto its original strike heading, and the EOTS cued the first ground target on his list, the one he'd abandoned 3 minutes ago to chase a trainer jet through the most dangerous sky on Earth. Weapons bay open. A Raphael Spice, precision-guided bomb dropped off the internal station. Wings deploying, GPS and electro-optical guidance steering it toward a regime target below. Bay doors closed, already cueing the next aim point before the first bomb hit the ground. And then he got back to work.